Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. Congratulations to Ilhan Omar, the Congresswoman from Minneapolis. She prevailed. Wow. And she prevailed by a nice margin, quite frankly. She had the same challenger a couple of years ago, and she won by a mere 2 percentage points. But this time, she had a convincing victory. Congratulations to her. We'll be talking about that later in the next few days because indeed she will be at the Rainbow Push Convention, which is what we're getting ready for. She will be there. Senator Bernie Sanders will be there. Uh, Former state senator Nina Turner will be there, and the Nation magazine will be honoring Reverend Jackson. Of course, they endorsed, not of course, but they did endorse Reverend Jackson when he ran for president. So Reverend Dr. William Barber, Reverend Al Sharpton, so many people are going to be honoring his more than 60 years of ministry and the 40th anniversary of his first presidential run. It's hard to believe that it's been 40 years. It feels as if it were yesterday, but it was many yesterdays ago. But so much of what he campaigned on, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, it's like he saw into the future.
Absolutely.
He was vilified for saying we need to balance um, Israeli security with Palestinian justice. You didn't mention the word Palestinian, the proper noun Palestinian, 40 years ago. We had a no talk policy. And health care for all, that was something that he campaigned for. America's infrastructure. I have to tell you, frankly, Ari Bloomkatz, executive editor of In These Times, I was like, infrastructure? That did not sound like anything you really wanted to care about until we marched across, I think it was the Manhattan Bridge, which was falling down in 88. He said, this is happening all over the country. We've got to do something about this. So we've got a lot to talk about because he doesn't want to rest on those laurels. As you know, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, chair of Rainbow Push, he wants to look at the path ahead. He said, now, okay, that was great. Now what do we do? There's so much work to be done. Dr. David Gibbs, The Revolt of the Rich, the author of that book. Go to Amazon and get that right now, everybody. And hey, everybody. Hey, Andre and Dave Dowling up there in Canada. Shirley in beautiful Philadelphia. Wanda in North Carolina. Andre, of course, is in Chicago. Robert, where are you? Zenobia, where are you? How you doing, everybody? Like and share, like and share. Please like and share. I need you thumbs up, thumbs up. We need to do that for our algorithms. It really helps us a lot. So please like and share. Everybody who is watching right now, Miss Wanda, if you would, please go over to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. That helps us as well. Santita Jackson and friends, we're streaming there, but please go over to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. That's where Facebook wants you to be. And we're on Twitter at Santita J. We've got a lot to go over today. We're looking at hmm, the Republicans have announced their plan to subvert the 2024 election. We're going to be talking about that in the next hour. What will that look like? Indeed, Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders said, don't be fooled by this dog and pony show that we're seeing with former President Trump. He's laying the case in advance, and we missed it several years ago. Let's not miss it now. He's laying the case for election subversion. He's cultivating his supporters to not trust the results unless he wins. So, what do you think about that? And there's a lot going on, and we have to talk about that. But first, let's talk about Iran. When I turned on CNN yesterday and saw uh, that Wolf Blitzer was already in Israel, I said, "Oh my goodness, what is going on? What does he know that we don't know?" And he intoned, we're waiting for a strike from Iran, blah, blah, blah. Wow. Is there anything that can be done, to achieve peace between these two powers? Israel has long wanted the United States to side with them in a conflict with Iran, which we already do, but they wanted us to do that militarily. Now we have boots on the ground there. And what does this mean? Are Americans inclined to fight in a war now? It seems that Americans are just tired and we don't have any money, no matter how much we support anyone. There's just a lot going on. So uh, let's talk about it. And of course, this is on the precipice of the Democratic convention. which is in Chicago, the 19th through the 21st. Ari Bloomcats and attorney C.K. Hoffler. We cannot wait to be together for that. But first, we're going to be at the Rainbow Push Convention, the 15th through the 18th gathering. And we want Ari, let people know, attorney C.K. Hoffler, let them know, people who are demonstrating, people who really want to be heard. Guess what? We want you to come to 930 50th Street, the Rainbow Push headquarters, because indeed, Reverend Jackson offered, if not now, offered the building to, if not now, as a meeting place. He said, look, you all, if you need a physical place to meet, he did this months ago. And he still means that. And we want to have these conversations. And as people are going out to demonstrate, we want you to know how you should demonstrate. You will have provocateurs who will be marching with you. But if you do not respond to them, if you call them out, your marches will not devolve into violence, which is the plan of the establishment. Don't fall for that. We want to talk with you about that. So let's get right to it. Attorney C.K. Hoffler, chair of Rainbow Push, legal analyst on Court TV. So excited about that. Former president of the largest and oldest Black Bar Association in the world, the National Bar Association. I'm breathless, and she represents so many people right now. Of course, Ari Bloomcats, executive editor of In These Times magazine. Some of the best articles, really written from the people's perspective. They just tell the truth. Who's being favored, who's being disfavored. A lot of issues that don't make the corporate media, they cover those issues. Please support In These Times magazine. We need our independent media, and we need our media who stand for us. Thank you for giving us a thumbs up, everybody. Thumbs up, Jean from Portland, Oregon. How you doing, sweetie? John Holloman, how you doing, sweetie? Everybody, like and share. Louis Chewy, please like, and subscribe on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. But let me speak to the author of The Revolt of the Rich. Everybody get that. Go to Amazon and get this book, The Revolt of the Rich. The historian from University of Arizona, out there with, what is it? With the air conditioner, bless your heart. So let's get right to it. What is going on with Iran right now?
Iran has had multiple provocations from both the United States and Israel over years, and they've more or less turned the other cheek repeatedly. There was the assassination of Major General Soleimani under the Trump presidency, to which, presumably with Israeli support and Israeli coordination, I would guess. And Iran remarkably did not retaliate, or no significant retaliation for that. There was the more recent incident where Israel responded to provocations from Israel, attacks from Israel, attacking, I believe, the Iranian embassy in Syria, bombing the Iranian embassy in Syria. They responded with a large-scale missile attack in Israel, but they actually communicated with the United States and to Israel through the United States as to where the attacks were taking place. So they gave advanced notice to Israel where the attacks were taking place, which meant they weren't very effective. In other words, they turned the cheek once again. Now, the latest provocation from Israel is not likely to be taken so lightly. The provocation specifically was the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Ismail Haniyeh was a top figure in Hamas, who was there for the inauguration of the new Iranian president. And the Israelis blew him up. He was also somebody who was trying to negotiate a ceasefire with the Israelis. It sends a number of signals. One is the Israelis are very definitely not the slightest bit interested in a ceasefire. It certainly sends that signal. And it also sends a signal to the Iranians that we will humiliate you. It was a humiliation to the Iranians because obviously it occurred in Tehran during a high-profile event, the inauguration of the president. The Iranians were not able to find out about and stop the attack. It's always an embarrassment for them in terms of lack of security. Secondly, there was the assassination of a Hezbollah figure, a top Hezbollah figure in Beirut by the Israelis. Hezbollah is a enormously large militia in Lebanon, a Shiite militia that is very closely connected to Iran. Iran helped to found it and helped to sustain it. And so this also is an affront against Iran. And it appears that the Israelis are trying to, by all indications, it looks like they simply want a war with Iran, is what they want. And it's unlikely Iran is going to undertake a kind of slap in on the wrists that they've done in the past. The expectation is they will do, when nobody knows, but probably soon, they will do some kind of much more extensive retaliation against the Israelis on account of this, directly from Iran and also from Hezbollah, which is a formidable militia. And, you know, the most likely scenario would be a large scale missile attack. Both Hezbollah and Iran have a sizable long range series of missiles. I believe Hezbollah alone, I think, has 100,000 to, I think, possibly as many as 200,000 missiles that could strike at any point in Israel. Iran, further away, also has a sizable number. And they could do a great deal of damage to Israel. Israel has a very advanced missile interception system, but they cannot cope with a missile attack on that scale. Um, and they have these underground bomb shelters. They could put much of their population underground, but there's only so long they could do that. Their economy has to function. And the Iranians and Hezbollah could destroy a lot of the above ground infrastructure of Israel with this kind of missile attack. How far they will go, I don't know. Nobody knows. But the expectation is this will be a sizable retaliation against Israel. And it would appear what the Israelis want to do is start a war with Hezbollah and possibly with Iran as well. Um, and this would not be an easy war by any means. I mean, apart from Iran, Hezbollah and Israel did go to war in 2006. Israel invaded Lebanon in 2006, Operation Protective Edge, and the Israeli military was largely humiliated by Hezbollah. They had not achieved most of their military objectives, and they lost much higher casualties than expected. They withdrew without really achieving their main objectives in 2006. And so, this will not be, from a purely military standpoint, a walk in the park for the Israelis. If they went to war with Lebanon, and Iran would be a much more complex operation. By the way, it must be said, Iran is what is termed a threshold nuclear power. There was a very effective agreement signed by Obama, the JCPOA, which basically committed Iran to not developing nuclear weapons. This was repudiated by the Trump administration, which was a extremely reckless act by Trump to repudiate this agreement. Its repudiation was reaffirmed, by the way, by Biden. So this is a continuity between Trump and Biden. And so, Iran now is a threshold nuclear power. What that means is they're one step away from full nuclear weapons capability. They could develop nuclear weapons in a short period of time, possibly as short as several weeks. Deployable nuclear weapons, launchable nuclear weapons. So this is very dangerous. And what is Israel thinking? What is Netanyahu thinking? It would appear that what he wants to do is to start a war with one or both of these entities, Hezbollah and or Iran, and then drag the United States into the war to a greater extent than it's been dragged in already. The United States seems to be committed to backing Israel almost no matter what it does, and has no control over Israel. It kind of can complain and sort of wag its finger at Israel. But the thing that the U.S. could do, which is cut off aid to Israel, that will be effective, the U.S. refuses to do. And Harris, rhetorically, she's made mild criticisms of Israel, but I suspect it's all cosmetic. And there's no doubt if she were president, if she wins the election, she will continue with policy of completely unrestrained backing of Israel. And so what this would mean is in a full-scale war, there is the danger the U.S. would be drawn into the war in terms of using direct U.S. forces. In other words, the U.S. is an active combatant in the war. Probably not with ground troops, but with air and naval assets. The United States would be at war with Hezbollah and or with Iran. Okay, I suspect Israel has been wanting that for a long time, and now it may be seen as the opportunity by Netanyahu. Again, the recklessness of this is extraordinarily great. This could cause enormous destruction in Israel, including possibly the use of nuclear weapons. And so this is very worrisome. I should add Russia is involved in this as well, and that they've been longstanding backers of Syria. And more recently, they've established a very close military relationship with Iran. Russia also has nuclear weapons, by the way. Um, and so where this would go, nobody knows. And I think what we have here is a very dramatic example of how America's unconditional support for Israel, no matter what it does, is endangering U.S. security, because that's what it's doing. I mean, there are all sorts of ways Iran could retaliate against the United States if it were to become involved. Iran is not without options here. It could sink tankers in the Persian Gulf. It can engage in terrorist acts around the world. There are all sorts of ways it could retaliate. Um, and so, the United States is and will continue to pay a heavy price for its unconditional support for Israel.
Dr. David Gibbs, the author of Revolt of the Rich. What do you think, everybody? What do you think is happening? What do you think? What's next? Ari Bloomkatz, executive editor of In These Times magazine. What is our takeaway from this? I mean, how do you see these developments? How do you see this story?
Thanks so much, Santita, and great to be on with you all. Hi, CK and David, great to be on with you this morning. The one of the things I'm thinking about this morning is actually Vincent Harding, who in Chicago before he passed away about 10 years ago, and
Mhm.
Vincent Harding, wrote this speech that's often called, A Time to Break the Silence, that Dr. Martin Luther King read in New York and spoke in New York about a year, I think, to the date or one day before Dr. King was assassinated. And in that speech, Dr. King gives, this famous line of war and violence begets violence, war begets war. And this is, something that I remember very deeply my father telling me when I was 6 years old and we were huddled on my parents' bed. It was me and my siblings were huddled on my parents' bed watching George H.W. Bush declare the first Gulf War and announce to the nation, I'm going to war for the first time. And I remember telling my father, we felt scared, we weren't sure what was going on, and my father also gave this line. He was like, and one of the horrible things also about war is that it begets more war. And this to me is the takeaway that I'm having today, which is that we have known a long time that the only way that Netanyahu can maintain any sort of power, that the only way the right-wing fascists and fanatics in the Israeli government can continue pushing their agenda is through more and more violence right now. And it's the only mode in which the Israelis know how to move right now. And it should not be lost that for a very minute of how many people's lives they are endangering, not only in Israel and Palestine, not only in the region, but really across the globe, which David, I really appreciate you mentioning as well, is that this is really, about endangering everyone in self-fulfilling power in the Israeli government. And, I have family that's, at the border with
Mhm.
Lebanon. I have other family in Israel. I have comrades in Gaza and the West Bank as well. Right now. The amount of death we're seeing, the amount of wanton disregard for human life is beyond anything right now. We're seeing the genocide. I forget if it's 313 days right now or over 3. I mean, we are seeing a never ending of violence. And what we're also seeing is the Israeli government and Netanyahu trying to continue to shift the focus and trying to keep moving on what is the issue here at hand, and where can the battleground of conversation be taking place. And so, I think we saw today, ceasefire talks were supposed to take place. Today, Hamas, my understanding, is saying we're not showing up to that. And it's like, can you blame them? Because the Israeli government just assassinated, one of the leaders of these ceasefire talks after like several months, right? Why would you go to ceasefire talks if you're just going to be assassinated at the end of the day? Doesn't make like much sense at all. And we do see American diplomats and representatives in the region right now. I think obviously Biden and Harris and the U.S. government will do absolutely everything to stay out of war with Iran, to stay out of like global conflict. And what to me is also interesting about this is Iran, very recently, I think 2 days ago, also basically said like, hey, look, there is a way out of retaliation here. There is a way out of war. And guess what that is? End the violence, end the war, call for ceasefire. That is like what we can actually like solve like issues in the and so all of a sudden you have Iran sounding like the adult in the room, sounding like the most reasonable like folks in the room here. And I actually think it's a pretty like brilliant like strategy in many ways to like actually apply pressure like in that way to try and get a ceasefire. I also don't think that'll be effective. The Israeli government, Netanyahu, Gallant, Ben-Gvir, all of these folks have signaled that they will listen to nobody. They will stop at nothing. They only know one move right now, and that is more death, that is more violence. And I think, one of the things that is a bit unfortunate that David, I think you mentioned as well, is that Harris does not look like she is meaningfully going to change course on Gaza or on any of the issues in the region. And we do have, really significant movement in the United States around the Not Another Bomb campaign, or around the Uncommitted movement. We're going to see that really highlighted at the DNC as well, but we've also seen it have like really profound shifts and effects. And you could also make the argument that one of the reasons that Vice President Harris is now the Democratic nominee is because there was so much pressure from anti-war movements, from the uncommitted movements, combined with numerous like other things that actually has caused Biden to step aside. But that's not going to change whether or not the Democratic Party is going to listen to anti-war segments of the party. The Democratic Party has signaled this entire time that they are willing to shed the parts of its coalition that are anti-war, that are calling to stop the genocide, that they are willing to shed that for the most part, if they can, for their idea of how to win the election, which is to go hard on reproductive justice and to try to really separate reproductive justice from issues of Palestinian liberation, of queer liberation, and all of these numerous issues. It seems very clear that the Democratic Party's strategy in many ways is to isolate reproductive justice as the wedge issue for the election that they're hoping will like really turn out the voters that they need. So, and I'm not sure that's a winning strategy at the end of the day. But my, main takeaway from this right now is that violence begets violence, war begets war, and without meaningful intervention from the United States, we're sending bombs and bombs and bombs. We're sending money, and have been for quite a long time without meaningful intervention from the United States. I think we're only going to see violence continue in these proxy wars with Israel and Hezbollah in particular continue.
Well, it seems like the corporate media are ready for war. Before I come to you, Attorney C.K. Hoffler, I know that Dr. Gibbs has to leave us this morning, but I wanted you to respond to Arlene because she said that your opinions, Dr. Gibbs' opinions, are too often anti-Democratic Party. More balance on this show, please. Before you respond, let me say this. I don't do talking points. I do truth. I don't traffic in talking points. I want to be fair. And I want you to have accurate information. I don't want to gain an office and lose my soul. I want peace. We've had war, whether the Republican or Democratic Party has been in power. That's not right. Now we have boots on the ground over there. That's not right. Americans more and more are hungering for peace. That is what we're talking about. So, I mean, this is not about a party. This is about the principle of peace. That's interestingly enough, we can never quite get to, Dr. Gibbs. But why don't you respond to Arlene? Because that is the charge. Whenever you say something that does not make it sound as if you're coming from the party,
Mm,
you are charged with, and we hear it all the time, Arlene.
mm,
But it's not fair. It's really a very, very sly form of censorship. Don't share your opinion. You gotta watch that, Arlene, because I'm seeing it, and certainly that's my read on it. But why don't you respond? She says you're too often anti-democratic party. Were you looking at party, or what were you looking at as you've arrived at these conclusions, or as you're processing this information, Dr. David Gibbs?
I think the first and foremost thing I look at is the death toll in Gaza, which, according to the British medical journal Lancet, is close to 200,000 dead, which is about 10% of the population. A lot of these are children, by the way. An awful lot of the dead are children.
Mhm.
That's the first thing I look at. And that is a policy being undertaken by President Biden and Vice President Harris, backed by the Republican Party as well. This is a bipartisan policy, no doubt about it. Um, I don't see myself as a party spokesman. If you want a party spokesman, obviously the Democratic National Committee can do that. Much of the mainstream press is becoming a spokesperson for parties, I don't see myself as playing any role in that. I just try and emphasize the facts as I see them, and the facts as we're seeing them is really immense human suffering in Gaza being brought on by U.S. policy to a significant degree, by Israeli policy, but also the U.S. by backing Israeli policy. And I don't intend to soft pedal that so as to, make the Democratic candidate look good. Again, this question is, what is my job title? My job title is as a professor who tries to present the facts and analyze the facts as clearly as possible. And again, if you want somebody with the job title spokesman for the Democratic Party, you'll have to look elsewhere because that's not me.
Well, is there anything you'd like to say before you go? Because
Um,
when you tell me 30 minutes, I pay attention to you because I
well,
want you to come back.
I really appreciate that. I very much appreciate that. Yeah, well, this entire war in the Middle East is the result of flawed U.S. policy to a significant degree. What Israel is doing is made possible by the fact that the U.S. has been subsidizing Israeli militarism for 50 years on a massive scale. All right, and you know, um, Arlene said that the Republican Party will be the destruction of Palestine. Well, both parties are doing a damn good job of destroying Palestine, as far as I can tell. I don't see the Democratic Party soft pedaling the notion of destroying Palestine. Both parties are doing that. And again, I'm not going to soft pedal that just to make the Democratic Party happy. Um, and so, anyway, I do have to go, but it's been a pleasure being on with all of you, and have a great day.
Blessings to you. Everybody get the book, The Revolt of the Rich by Dr. David Gibbs. Can't wait to have you back
All right, thank you.
early
Bye-bye.
tomorrow morning because we got a lot to talk about because we are, as you pointed out, Ari Bloomcats, will Hamas be at the table today? The day is more than half over in that part of the world. And, we're looking at, will there be a strike? We don't know. And, it's interesting because attorney C.K. Hoffler brings to us yet another perspective. She spent a lot of time in Africa because this is not the only language in which she's fluent. So when Reverend has gone around the world, he has taken her with her, not only because she is of counsel, but because, you do need your own interpreter with you, because there are nuances in every language, right? And she's gone to school in Switzerland, interestingly enough, the great, what is it, the neutral place, right? Maybe not so much anymore, But I mean, but how do you see this? I'm making the point that you have a global view. I mean, and you've lived in Canada. You have not, you've never, you have another take because you've lived in other places. And Ari, I think that's a big deal. When you live in other places, I mean, it's one thing to see America from the inside out. It's another thing when you leave the United States, the conversation about us changes. And for those of us who've spent significant uh, chunks of time out of the United States, we know this. And I think and it makes you even a more ardent advocate for peace because you can see that increasingly we're not believed around the world, CK.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seen in a very negative light. And if you care about the troops, for example, that's not good for them. It endangers them, it imperils them. When you have American tourists, I mean, see, these things don't happen on our soil, at least not right now. But some friends wanted to go to Paris not too long ago, and I said, I don't think so, CK. It's a hotspot for terrorism, and I don't know. There's so much that's popping off in the world. And what am I supposed to do? Get on a Boeing plane to get there? Yes, I said that. I mean, what? They've got some people trapped in outer space. I gave you a whole lot, but how do you see this? And when can we see you on Court TV before you say another word?
Well, I expect to be on Court TV tomorrow from 2 to 3. So that's the first word. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Santita, and to your panel. I view this, I've always said, and this is such a cliche, no one really profits in war in terms of the human aspects of war. Certainly, there are a lot of big businesses that do profit when there's war. And as you said accurately, in this country, every president has his war, and sometimes 2 or 3 wars. And it doesn't matter whether the president's a Democrat or Republican. That is the history of the United States. It certainly has been in my lifetime. The way that I view it, I was living in Europe, as you said, during the late 60s and 70s, and then went back again in the 80s, and in Switzerland in particular. And I do think that there has always been a negative perception of Americans. We were tolerated back then
Mm.
because of the fact that we are superpower. We are such a strong country on many levels, from a geopolitical standpoint, from a socioeconomics, from all vantage points. And I still maintain that the United States this is my home, this is the place where I prefer to live. And many people who may take strong exception to our domestic and international policies and postures do feel that this is still the best place to live. Having said that, the perceptions of us, which impacts what it's like when you're an American traveling abroad, what it's like when you're an American living abroad, those perceptions are very negative. We are perceived as the entitled group. And it's so interesting for us, for me, for anyone to perceive me as being entitled because of my nationality is something that's very strange, because I would consider myself the antithesis of the entitled person here in the U.S. So I think that when your panel, Santita, talked earlier about Iran, this is going to be the issue that people are going to want to hear Vice President Kamala Harris speak on. They're going to there's euphoria, and there's a sense and I'm part of this euphoria. I'm part of this excitement that Vice President Harris is going to be or is our nominee. I'm very excited by the ticket as a
And will
Democrat.
be president. I really do believe that.
I believe she's going to
I
be
do.
president.
I do believe
I'm claiming it, and I believe it. And I think that this is the strongest ticket to take us to where we need to be in this country. What Americans will want to hear when we get past, the Republicans and former President Trump and J.D. Vance are in some respects making it easy for some to say, I just can't support you by some of the statements and positions they're taking. Now they're setting this up. He's a very shrewd politician. Make no mistake about it. But I think their playbook isn't quite working because they're not quite certain yet. They're navigating through how to deal with Vice President Kamala Harris. I think they haven't figured that out. And if there were more time, they'd be able to figure it out. But they haven't quite figured it out. And she's running 100 miles an hour. They're running 200 miles an hour going south. She's running 100 miles an hour going north. She and Governor Walz. So I think that that's the dynamic, but people are going to want to hear what her perspective is on Iran, what her perspective is. They know her perspective on Gaza because
Mhm.
she came out early calling for a ceasefire. But now the details, but when she gets into the weeds, there's some critics, and if we talk about gender politics, a lot of men, and no disrespect intended to the panelists, but a lot of men are wondering, how is she going to handle herself on a world stage? Well, she's going to handle herself the way that she's been handling herself on the world stage. And there are a lot of women in the world who are leaders of countries that handle themselves just as aptly and in some cases better as any of the male presidents that their countries have had. So I'm not concerned about that. But I do think that people are going to want to understand and hear from her on her position on Iran. What are we going to do? Are we going to be involved through Israel in another war? And when and what are the limitations, or will there be limitations on that? And I think that's going to be a critical issue for her. And she, from what I understand, is very prepared to tackle that issue. I think in the minds of the military and the mind, she's going to be the commander in chief. That, and this is something we haven't seen in this country. How will they receive a woman as commander in chief? Well, she's going to have to stand strong on some of these international issues because, in terms of how many men feel, and this is according to polls, and although there's a strong move amongst white men, amongst black men, amongst men of color, and amongst men in general to support Kamala, I think the
Mhm.
rank and file and the military, Santita, we're going to have to hear how she feels on this issue, what her plan is, what her vision is, and what her rollout is. And she's going to have to be quite specific. So, that's a long way of answering your question. What is my lens? My lens is one of, I think, globally, we are not well perceived. And I think the war in Gaza and what's going to happen in Iran is going to cement world perceptions of the United States as a superpower, potentially not in a positive way.
And it makes it difficult, Ari Bloomcast, this is what she would be walking into. Well, any president, this is what former President Trump would be walking into in the presidency. You can campaign one way, um, and then you've got to govern with a whole different set of realities, many of which we're just not aware. We don't get the security briefings. That's why I get, Ray McGovern on here as often as I can, because he was the lead CIA analyst who briefed the president. I mean, there's the information that he's forgotten more than we will ever know. So, I mean, his framing for me, it really is nonpartisan. And that's where, while I'm a registered Democrat, my analysis tends to be nonpartisan. There's an expression, Ari, and who I one day I know he's going to be a rabbi. I just know it. I love it. I got the preacher feel. They say, I say I'm a Baptist, but in our church we say, but I'm glad God is not. you know, I mean, and so I think we've got to have some objectivity here because it is your children who will be the boots on the ground. It's your husband, it's your wife. And we're vulnerable at home now. We're not as impermeable as we have been in the past, as CK has really, that has, as you stated. Yeah, we've got some. I mean, Ari, what are we looking at? I mean, how can this impact the 2024 election? We thought it was going to just be Gaza. But now you've got, probably the best known anchor on cable news, Wolf Blitzer, who's in Tel Aviv awaiting a strike. I mean, right now, when I saw him over there, I said, well, my goodness, because you can't get any information out of Israel unless it's cleared by their government also. So I said, well, what does he know? And what does this mean? Because one of the Morning Stars said, "Well, I think Netanyahu is is really being a provocateur, to paraphrase, to undermine Kamala Harris's election. I guess to force her in a corner. I mean, what do you see? How do you see this impacting 2024?"
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about in regards to how this can impact 2024. And I think there's like various ways that it could. On one hand, I think there's a perspective that, this is a situation that Vice President Harris was handed. That was, in many ways, obviously, she was part of the administration and a key decision maker on lots of things. But I think we also have to recognize that, Biden was, I think in many ways unable to secure a ceasefire, and he very much could have in many ways, over the last 10 months, and did not. And it's a pretty wild thing to hand a new Democratic nominee with this. And I think one of the things that we are seeing is Netanyahu and the far right administration in Israel trying to exploit this moment and trying to exploit 2024 and seeing what they can both get away with. I do, very much agree that I think the vice president and Democratic nominee is going to be able to handle this situation very well and avoid, war with Iran. And I do think there are larger questions about whether or not we'll be able to secure a ceasefire in Gaza. And we have seen Vice President Harris call for that. Call for a ceasefire. We did also see Biden call for a bit of a ceasefire according to his own plan. And one thing that I think could be beneficial for driving out voters right now, especially in key swing states, could be for the vice president to continue to push on messages of peace and on ending the violence, not only in the prospective violence with Iran and with Lebanon and Hezbollah, but also to really push and continue on messaging about the need for peace and to end the genocide in Gaza as well. And so, I think that is not something that needs to necessarily be shied away from. I think we're talking about, in Wisconsin and Michigan, in Georgia, Arizona, in the key swing states, we are talking about not a lot of votes that separated Trump and Biden during the last election, and we're going to see very close margins again here. There was a poll that came out from the I believe it was from the Arab American Institute in the spring. I believe that message didn't sound alarmed that 1 in 5 voters in key swing states were perhaps not going to vote for Biden if there was not meaningful movement on ending the genocide. Obviously, Vice President Harris is a very different candidate, is a much more exciting candidate, much more unifying candidate, and a much better, obviously, candidate in so many different ways. But I do think, we are only a few months out from the election, and I do wonder if there is still a question about these thin margins in key swing states and how we can really get those margins in key swing states. And so one of the things I'm thinking about with regards to that are groups that are really working to get out the vote in key neighborhoods in Milwaukee, in Cleveland, and in Pittsburgh, in Phoenix as well, and what sorts of messages they need to be able to carry door to door to really get folks out. And I think we are seeing such huge excitement around Harris right now that we are going to be seeing much larger turnout than we would have under Biden. And if I'm the Democratic Party right now, one of the big things that I'm obviously focusing on is how can we really try and get Obama levels of
turnout for us to win, for the Democrats to win the election. And Santita, I think on the next segment, I'm sure we're going to talk about the fact that Trump has been rehearsing to steal the election for quite some time. We're seeing actual rehearsals
in Georgia for Trump to steal the election. And sometimes
He's cultivating the base. He's getting them
he's
ready.
cultivating this. He's been putting it in play for a number of years, positioning judges, positioning electoral officials, and all of this sort of stuff. So one of the things that I think is one of the potential best deterrents for that situation is obviously for Democrats to win by as large a margin as possible, right? And so for me, that also means how much can Dems turn out the vote right now. And I'm just also sending so much love and care to everybody knocking on doors right now that's carrying a golf ball to knock on the doors because they're tired that their hands are bleeding from knocking on the doors with their fists the whole time too, because that is where I see the 2024 electoral battleground right now, is that door to door, voter to voter turnout in key swing states. And so far I think Vice President Harris is giving folks a lot of energy and messaging to behind. And I think that one of the ways to really continue that is we are in a moment of intense violence, of genocide, of just awful suffering. There are so many people in this country who have lost family members, who have lost friends, have lost so many people to this violence, that I think that really also giving everyone reasons to come out and vote enthusiastically in November. So they're not only voting, they're bringing friends to do it too. That's, I think, the messaging that I would really be pushing on in a lot of ways. But we are seeing such effective work from the Harris administration right now on so many levels. It is, CK, I loved your analogy of the Harris your campaign running 100 miles north and Vance doing so far south. And another thing along those lines is they have no idea what to do with Harris. Trump has it seems very clear that Trump is
He was ready for
freaked out,
Biden, right?
talking to a black woman, this at all. And meanwhile, JD Vance is just the picture of the worst type of white supremacist patriarchy out there.
Have
So
you,
there
have you
couldn't
seen the
be
sharecropping story on him? I mean, it
Wait,
finally
what was
came
it?
out. His venture capital firm, basically, they were into sharecropping.
Oh my
They
God.
own this farmland, and that they were getting people to work the farmland, but the workers were not benefiting. The
Yeah.
owners of the farmland. I mean, CK, this is, I mean, but you know what? It's the messaging, because we're only getting a clip of his speech, right? He has a whole speech that he is delivering to people, and it's landing with a significant chunk of the American public. And we have to be very honest about that. And the only way that you can counter it is to understand it, to know it. You can't ignore it. You cannot just look at clips, because trust me, the top politicos analyze everything. And they are very, very trained in analyzing the opposition. I mean, so CK, it's about the messaging, because as I already said, look, I'm praying for the people with the bleeding knuckles too, and hope that they have strong stomachs. So some of them are getting the door slammed in their faces, because there is still a lot. There's a lot of ground that Kamala Harris, this Vice President Harris, has to make up.
Absolutely.
Because Gaza it is very damaging. Now you've got Iran, and you have people saying that, well, okay, we need to conscript. We need to we need to reinstitute the draft. I know you don't want to hear that with two sons of draft age. I mean, nobody wants to hear that, and not in the United States.
No, absolutely. Santita, the thing is, I think that that's going to be the vulnerabilities, and I'm saying what most political pundits have been saying for a while. Gaza is going to be a vulnerability for the Democrats, as well as Iran, the emerging issue of Iran. What is the significance of Iran? But also immigration. These are the areas where Kamala has to come out strong. She's going to have to, because for those, former President Trump's base is solid. JD Vance is solidifying that base, but that's more of the same thing. We never expected to get any of them, any of his base to, and I don't think that Kamala's team expected that. But there's a wide margin of independents and undecided voters that are in the middle that will make the difference. That's the group, and many of them are young people because
Mhm.
young people don't view the politics the same way we do. What they saw were young people dying in Gaza. What they're thinking, they're going to equate what's happening in Iran to another Gaza. They're looking at the immigration issue differently. Young people look at this country as being more of a blended country. And so when there are immigration issues, they're looking at it through that lens. So Kamala's going to have to make up a lot of ground on that. This is going to be a very, very, very close race. Even with the euphoria that I feel every day, the excitement I feel every day, I was going to be in Kamala's camp or Joe Biden's camp anyway. You see, I am that person who was
Mhm.
always going to be in Kamala's camp. As a Democrat. So I'm not the person that the Republicans would have needed to try to persuade. There's nothing they could say to me that would persuade me to ever vote for Donald Trump. Period. End of discussion. Similarly, they've got their people who are saying there's nothing that Kamala Harris can say that would persuade me to vote for a Democrat, period, end of discussion. So those two groups, that's the divided country. We're firmly entrenched on the Democratic side. We're more excited than ever, and we're going to go out and get 10, 20 people who are undecided to vote. It's that middle group, that group of and those young people who didn't like Biden, who didn't like Trump, who may be more, they're more excited about Kamala Harris. I will say this, more excited about Kamala Harris, but there are so many more in the middle, Santita, that the Democratic Party is going to have to capture. And that's why it's going to be a tight race because it's not the people who are, and there might be a few people on each side in each camp that may wander into the other camp because of one thing or another, but the base is solid. What has happened with Kamala's ascension to the candidacy for president of the United States is that many Democrats who were feeling some kind of way about Biden are now feeling more solid about voting for Kamala. That's important. But she always needed them, Biden always needed them to win.
Mhm.
So it's that group in the middle. And I think that Kamala is making headway, is really infiltrating and getting and resonating with that group in the middle. But she's got a lot of work ahead every single day. When I say she's going 100 miles an hour going north, because she cannot afford to do anything but that. She has
Mhm.
got to the end, do that. Whereas Trump and JD Vance, they're trying to figure out what do we do? How do we do it? They're ultimately going to figure it out. It's just they don't have the time because the election is upon us. So the lack of time is benefiting Vice President Harris. The lack of time is to the detriment of former President Trump and JD Vance. And that's just the reality of it. So if I'm Kamala, I'm continuing to go 100, maybe I accelerated to 200 towards the end,
You
miles
got
an hour going south. I'm getting, not even responding to the noise in the background. She doesn't need to respond to whether she's a black woman. That's some foolishness and stupidity and craziness. Don't even waste your time responding to that. She doesn't need to respond to some of the stuff that they're saying. That's for their base. She doesn't need to respond to that for that group in the middle because guess what? That group in the middle, young folks, they view and undecided, they view this world as a more blended world anyway. So they don't need to wait. She doesn't need to waste time responding to that. She can let her surrogates respond to that
it.
foolishness. Like I respond to it on the. It is foolish. It just I
Well,
just can't even. It's just the most foolish thing. But it does resonate with some people. I don't know that it resonates with the independents and undecided folks because those folks are looking at the world in a different way. But my view of the world, you leave no stone unturned, no voter you got to go after everybody. I would not take for granted. I don't think her campaign is taking for granted
mhm.
any single voter. One thing also, finally, Santita, that I'm noticing a shift is that the black press is very, very engaged, and there's money that's being dedicated and poured into the black press. We haven't seen that. And I don't think that, I think a lot of it does have to do with Kamala, but a lot of it has to do with the Democratic Party recognizing that that is a demographic that they previously did not support and or very little. And so I'm seeing a slight change there.
Well,
And that's
they
going to
need
be
to.
important. Right, they need to. Actually, why wouldn't they have done it before? I mean, this is something that I've always been
Well,
critical of the
because
Democrats on.
their internal numbers are showing that they've lost ground with black people. They have, and you got uncommitted in 21 days. In 21 days, they were able to pull together 101,000 votes in Michigan. They got 30% of the Democratic vote in Minneapolis, my home station. So they've got work to do, and I think that if we start from that place, it makes it easier for you to do the work. Yeah, is it a steeper climb? Yeah, but we have to be very clear. This is your base is going to be what it is.
Right.
It's the not just the undecided, the turned offs.
Hmm.
And because you want to bring, if they keep trying to look for this middle, this Reagan Democrat, no. You have some people who are firmly in your camp who are angry and who are disappointed. Get them back. And I think that she can do that, but it's going to require she's got to turn the Titanic around, if you will. I
And
mean, and
she's
I think
making
she can do
progress. Right, she can do it, and she's making progress. It's feasible. It can be done. And I'm looking at it.
it.
Yes, I'm one of. I was not
But no,
excited,
but
candidly, about Biden's candidacy,
hold on.
but I was still going to vote. But now I'm very excited, and I think there are people like me who weren't excited, but they were going to vote begrudgingly because they understand what it could mean. But now people are excited, and but there's still a whole group of
That's
people
right.
that she's going to have to work on. And
That's right.
I don't believe she's taking them for granted. And
No,
for that,
but
she
I
did her
don't think
therapist.
that she is, but she got a lot. And because the thing is, I look at life beyond the
Yes,
election,
yeah,
because Biden got 81 million votes and went on to become the most unpopular president in modern history. So there's life. There's you win, and then you got to govern. And that's what but I got to go to the next hour. Everybody come on to the next hour. And that's why you got to be at the Rainbow Push convention. Chair of Rainbow Push's attorney CK Hoffler from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. She will be on Court TV. See, I remember it. I caught that. All you had to do was tell me, CK. That's all you had to do was tell me. 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. Send email to Court TV and tell them you want more of CK. Because I think she ought to have her own show, quite frankly. Hey, I said it. Just be quiet, CK. I said it. That's what I want. And a lot of people want that. And they need to know it's possible. Just be quiet. Let that top lip rest on that bottom one. It's okay. So everybody come to the next hour and join Ari Bloomkatz, executive editor of In These Times magazine. Become a subscriber, become a supporter. We need independent media, people who will tell us the truth. You're a scientist. You look at the data and it yields what it yields. The equal sign really is an equalizer, everybody. Okay? So let's get on over and let's talk about the Republican plan to subvert the election, to steal it. And it's happening in all the states. These folks, back with more of the Santita Jackson Show in the next hour. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.